Today I am showing you how to do something to the interiors without depending on a tile set. Now, the reason why this is so important is tile sets can be quite limiting. If you've paid attention to any of the lessons given by Finite or Hanes, we have very interesting little things to tell you is that it's good to plan before you start building. Now, in my case, I'm a little bit different than Hanes and Fire Knight. I tend to develop the structure in my head, because I'm not really that good at drawing, so I found ways to work around that. But for most people, it's really good to have something in front of you that references what you're trying to build. Now, if you have something you're trying to build, tiles are good to start with as they connect easily, they get things done. But ultimately, the big struggle here is once you've mastered that, it's also very limiting. Case in point, imagine looking at a Nordic ruin tile set and then looking at a cave tile set. Cave tile sets have a little bit more variation, have a lot more for you to develop with, but they're a little bit harder to tackle. In this case, using walls, pillars, cliffs, and other objects will end up being a little bit more difficult than the cave tiles themselves, but in turn, it allows for a lot more freedom of structure. So, a case in point here, we'll scroll up and look at two rooms that I have created here. One with tiles, the other not with tiles, but with walls. These are a bit different from one another, but generally have a similar shape to them. This is a lot easier for someone who's just starting a tile set. This is for someone who has learned the tile set and has decided the tile set is too limiting. And for those wondering why there's these different fragments popping out, none of the players will actually be able to see these unless they TCL, and then that's their fault, not ours. So, to pay attention here, this is just tiles. Over here, I use dirt cliffs, dirt mounds, balconies, and pillars to create the flooring in this room. This one does not have a ceiling yet, as this takes heavy rock asset usage. And the rocks I tend to use are for the project I work on. So, with this in mind, I'm going to show you a little bit of the tricks I use that may not be completely obvious from here. Case in point, the pillars here, they're usually built on the wall structures to make the walls flow more. In some areas, like this, you can see it flow just right with two walls without the need of a pillar. But if you hide this pillar, that's what it's hiding. Two walls that would not have merged properly. So this actually serves a good purpose. Now, it's a lot easier to use pillar 3 for this instance, but in other cases, pillar 4 and 5 and even 6 work properly as well. It all depends on the curvature and how much the overlap or gap is. And so that's going to be a skill set you're going to have to learn it with practice and what you're doing altogether. So without further ado, we're going to try building one of these ourselves. All right? So first off, I'm going to place an object down here so I can have a reference point. Because palettes do not like to be placed, does not like to have objects placed in the middle of a void. All right? So in this case, we're going to take a cliff. Now, when you look at these names, some of them might be a little bit confusing, but the NS here tends to mean there's no base under it. So we can, for instance, this is not the NS form. This is the NS form. The only difference is it does not have that base ground. For those who are concerned about the texture, this is a direct retexture due to my project. I am sorry for those who do not have these textures. But these assets are the same meshes, despite the texture difference. So the opal I sent you will work. So we're going to use this as a reference point. For those who have not set up an opal before, you go to World, Object Palette Editing. It'll take a couple seconds. I've already had mine loaded, but for those who are just learning, you have to click Load and select the opal you are using. Now, the nifty thing about opals is you can still load up an opal from a different project with different dependencies. Instead of crashing your CK, it'll just say that object is not there and will not let you select it. Now, the beauty of the opals is it's all in one little place. Instead of having a little tab for pillars, a tab for cliffs, a tab for boulders, a tab for walls, a tab for balconies, I have it all in one place where I know I'm going to use it. This is not meant for every asset you're ever going to use. These are just for the ones that you're going to be placing everywhere. And for those who do not understand interiors all that much, we don't have that many assets to deal with. All right, it might look like a lot, but in the end, we're going to be using around a maximum of 150 different objects in a dungeon. And that might sound like a lot, but full dungeons tend to have hundreds of items in it. So we are going to learn how to deal with these limitations and do it without using tile. So now with the opal selected here and loaded, if y'all are following with me, we can search in here. Let's say we want a wall. I have all my wall assets here. And we're going to start off with a corner. Doesn't really show anything right here, but we don't need it to. By Control, Alt, and left click, I am able to move it once selected from the opal here. So I don't have to actually go over here to grab anything and drag it in. I just have to select it on here and Control Alt left click. So now we're going to determine our height. For those who are just starting out, some people might think that it's a good idea just to have the base covered here. But if we're trying to get this to wrap around completely and try to keep it level in some areas, we're going to want this to go just a little bit lower than our actual asset. This means we'll have some wiggle room for the height to dip down a little bit more where the walls will be. Now, in corners, we can't drag, so in corners, they're going to be like this, and they're going to have a little bit of sharpness here. So we might want to round it out a little bit with a pillar, or we can simply rotate it in and it'll flow a little bit better. Depending on where it's intersecting, depending on how it's intersecting, and the textures and how they're flowing will determine if it looks better with a pillar or without. And sometimes certain pillars do a better job than others. So in this case, we got two that look just fine with one another. Now we're going to focus on corner. Oops. I am still getting used to palettes because I don't use it all the time. Bear with me here. So we're going to get corner 2. I know Skywalker here is saying blasphemy for me not using object palettes too much. Now we've created a wall that's a little bit curvy here. Yes, they can see that on stream. Thank you, Skywalker. We can get this going here. And now the beauty of using these walls is they don't have to be as exact as tiles. If tiles are not exact, there will be seams. Usually when you use walls, though, you won't be using the full top half, like the top edges or bottom edges here, because this will be covered with rocks for other details. So, for reference, this is a little chamber I'm creating. To simplify this a little bit more, we're going to put this here. My usual goal is not to show the shadowed edges. Now, Ludo loves his shadow edges, and that's perfectly fine. And you can see the vertex coloring within the rocks here. I use these as a reference of what not to show, though, because in caves, interior shadowing can be done with lighting a little bit better than landscaping inside cities. Now, this path here isn't really nav meshable, so we will rotate. Try to make it flow, and if it doesn't flow the way you want it to, we can simply throw in a pillar. 3 is my favorite, but 4 is another one of the ones I like. You get that little piece jutting out. You can resize a little bit if needed by using the S key and simply dragging. Any questions so far? All right. So now that we have this base, we can now actually position our dirt cliff the way we want to. Dirt cliffs are a good start for a room like this, as it provides a lot of ground, but for full customizability, you're going to have to tweak this a little bit with rocks, dirt mounds, boulder piles, balconies, and the like. All right. Case in point, some things that some people don't really realize is I love using pillars for some of this. It allows for more dynamic alterations, and in between pillars, we can use balconies themselves. So let's say I want to use pillars 2 and 3 to create structures like this. The dirt texture flows a little bit, but this needs a little bit of work. We can now take a balcony. Let's go for straight 1. A little bit of time and patience. You can actually filter these into one another, create a more fluid path. That flows, no clipping is showing, therefore we're fine. Now, that's useful for extending a balcony there, but we can also, let's take a ramp, do something over here. We have this basic structure now showing. This means we're probably going to see some ground under here, which means the pillar is going to show its second job. We can now lower this wall a little bit to compensate. In more involved situations, we might actually have to rotate said wall. But in this case, we probably will not. This should suffice. Now, the big jutting problem here is going to be this hole, which we can patch up with boulders. And LO4 is one of my favorites. Simply put, because we have Some like this being able to cover a heavy gap. It's great for the very beginning of it, but other rocks can be used to patch this piece, where this was better to patch the vertical piece. LO5 is good for getting near the base, and it will wrap around pillars you place to get a nice little structure here going. And MO1 tends to be very versatile. Depending on how you rotate it, it can look like 20 different objects. And that is just an invaluable rock to use. For others, they might enjoy other rocks differently, and the more you begin to appreciate some of the objects in this, the more you'll remember their names. Now with that patched up, no one will really see the void that was here. And for any weird blemishes here, we can patch up with dirt mounds later on. Now we can go for cliff. Now this is the end corner, if I remember correctly. So we're to go for an island around here. Now, for dirt mounds, I tend to use 1 and 3 to patch things up. This is where you're going to get really intimate with your rotation gizmo, because dirt mounds can be your saving grace, but it can also be the last pin in your coffin when it comes to your interior design. Because if you're not careful, these things will give you more clipping errors than almost anything else you deal with. So with proper rotation, we can hide the shadow little vertex painting here that's shown. Another reason why vertex painting is good is because it shows you the very border of what you're dealing with. So a lot of things to appreciate other than just vertex painting itself for its usefulness and how it looks inside a landscaping perspective. Now, one of the big goals from interior design that you have to remember right off the bat is that things have to be able to be navigated. So, though I'm placing these objects down, until you truly get an idea of scope for what something is, you're not going to know if it's navigatable right off the bat unless you bring in a reference. So, I'm going to go to here and pull a bandit. So I'm going to pull a wood elf because wood elves tend to be the smallest, if I remember correctly. But I could be wrong, so we're just going to grab any bandit that I can find. It's not a DLC bandit because I don't want to know what bandit gear they're probably using. So we're going to go for the... where? Wood elf. So, for nav meshing, you want things to be at the very most like halfway between the knee and the ankle. Usually anywhere above that part, they're just going to keep bumping into it when they run through your nav mesh. So the goal is to have everything spacious enough for the NPC to go around your dungeon. Now, in this instance, this might not be enough because though it looks like it's enough, NPC's coding for nav meshing is a bit more restrictive. So NPC's hitboxes are a bit thicker than what you'd think they'd be. On a scale of 1 to 5 Cs, this guy is 1 C, his hitbox is about 2 to 3 Cs. Now, go back to this. 3 is good for a general start. 1 can be for the finer points. Filtering them in makes a easier transition from one level to another. And if you need for more exact ones that have a heavier slope, Dirt Mound 2 and 4 will cover that. 2 will be the size of Dirt Mound 1 with a more steep slope. 4 will be for 3. But enough rotation and enough dirt mounds, you can get some very interesting things. But again, we're going to have to also be conscious of the number of assets we're using altogether, because the engine itself has a ref ID limit, and that's not as big of a problem as too many assets in one area without proper optimization can lead to frame drops. So optimization will be something you're going to have to learn at some other point as well. Since we're doing a small room here, we're not going to need too much optimization in this area other than room bounding. LO3 is a good horizontal, but if in a pinch, can also be a very good vertical rock if you rotate it properly. Just be wary that, though vertical, it can clip through things just like dirt mounds do. So grabbing a shelf, unfortunately one of the things I did not add. So we're going to go to balcony and type the word curve. Curves are very useful tools as well, because they don't have too many polygons on the other side because they don't have too many sides. So we're only going to use it in specific areas, but when they're used properly, they can create very interesting setups. So for instance, I can have something like this here. And if the curve does not fully fit what you want for it, we can now splice corners into it. Just like I did with the pillars. You can use it for other balconies as well. Just ensure that there are no clipping issues within the assets itself. For the size, you're not really expecting NPCs to come here, but for more... So you have to keep a path known for NPCs. At most, you're going to see a portal here and a portal here, so they can have drop downs, but they're 9 times out of 10 just going to go through this route to go down. Here, we're not going to go to the out corner. The beauty of 3 cliffs covering about 3/4 of your room is a very amazing thing to have. Less ref IDs, which means it's still a little heavier on the polygon side, but polygons versus ref IDs. In this instance, the less references we have in general, it tends to be a little bit better to run. So as long as we're not using too many cliffs, cliffs are very useful assets instead of having to use like 500 dirt mounds. It's not very fun to place those dirt mounds either, so cliffs are a very fast and efficient way. With some minor tweaking with dirt mounds and rocks, you can create very interesting structures. So we're going to go back to our rocks here. 5 is this guy, the one that wraps around the pillar nicely. I think I put him right here. 4 is here. These are the L's. L3. Showed you L2 over there. Let's try L1. L1 tends to be the very big, almost spherical rock. It's very good for filling out gaps like this. And we can fill this little gap with a smaller rock. And so the large rocks are better for filling out massive gaps, and then you can tweak them around with smaller types of boulders to achieve a much more natural look for your caves. So LO3 got this piece, LO1 here. I can probably throw around another LO4. This time, use a couple more axes. Changes. That covers the gaps there. We can just now use M and S. So I'm not going to go much over here to save time, so I'm going to do some changes around this area to make it look more dynamic. Right quick, just to show off what you really can do now that you have this dynamic atmosphere. Are there any questions while I'm doing this? Now we got the general structure. We can now tweak the sides with rocks and on the sides. And we can also throw around boulder piles in the middle of the room to add some clutter that are natural. And we can then throw ferns and other flora around to make it more like an ecosystem that people can actually go through. So in this case, we're now going to go to boulder piles. We saw SO1. SO2 is this guy. Vertex shading makes it a little bit more annoying to mess around with in this instance, but we can all deal with it. Unfortunately, Zatax does not know I'm being recorded. Oh, she's here.
Oh no, I just muted myself out of politeness, but don't feel observed. You're just being recorded.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying she sent me DM, so y'all can read that.
Wait, you can read my DMs?
No, no. If they're streaming I'm streaming my screen, so they can see all my DMs.
Oh my gosh, what juicy details. Tell us more.
I know, right?
Yeah, I know.
Easy tax.
Don't remind me. By the way, for someone wondering, the very secrets of caves is rocks. It took a lot of time to discover this for some, but for many, it was always clear. The answer is always rocks. This rock here specifically, I love to use for water leaks because it has a spot, and combined with another rock, you can have that small little gap that no one can really see through. But you could put a water leak effect there, and I use that for Veyond Cave quite heavily.
Yay, rocks.
But allowing for some texture here and variation, this is a clipping line. No one really likes clipping lines, so we're just going to shove a pillar there. That's 5, looks good enough.
Your lecture rocks.
Yo.
Thanks.
They go away.
Oh,
Bad.
You get banned.
Yes.
Ban.
That is another reason why Zatex would love to stream here. Puns are bannable offenses. By the way, if my great uncle can see my obvious plagiarism of his company, you can send me a lawsuit if that doesn't bother your investment plans. Like the reason you disowned my family. So back off.
Quick question. I don't know if it was covered earlier. I missed it. Can you have too many rocks in these? Is it like like you don't want to have too many resources?
Performance-wise, yes, there can be such a thing as too many rocks. And on the other hand, you also have to limit yourself due to the ref ID limit. The problem is with the CK fixes, we've massively increased the ref limit. The problem is there's still a limit. So yes, in the long run, you do not have unlimited assets to place around, but rocks are still great. Just it's a fine balance. That's everyone's fear, Skywalker. Yes, occlusion planes are great. If you can use room bounding as well, that's also great. Room bounding is a lot more helpful in more square, rigid structures, so the more dynamic it is, a little bit harder it is to do room bounding. But you can use portals to make more diverse room bounds, which is going to be very useful for caves that use heavy asset counts, or use assets with high poly counts. So those are all small little things that all changed a little bit, and I'm looking at the 7 notifications on my Discord, and I already know all the lines on it. But it's also nice to keep because I can actually see the time. So
does that limit affect you creatively? Like, are you like, let's say you're working on a wall or something, and you're like, oh, I want to add like all these rocks on this wall, but let's say you have like 5 rocks already. Does that affect you? And you're like,
5 is peanuts. We're able to have. I think Zatax can give you a more accurate number as to how many assets we can have, but for any one cell, I tend to mess around with about 500 assets on an interior cell. For a landscaping cell, you're more limited in that area because you're loading more than just one cell at a time. You're loading adjacent cells. All right. So, but they also get their own little lighting engine, which is nice. They don't have to deal with 4 light sources per cell as often as we do. Or not 4 light cells per nitri shape. Shadow lights per cell.
How are you only using 500 assets in one cell?
It's before the fern apocalypse, okay? Calm down.
Oh my gosh, 500! It will be 5 million.
Fern apocalypse by the time it's all done. No, I use clusters way too heavily. It's going to be more like 200 ferns.
I can play with my 3 frames per second. Only the mightiest players can pull this off.
Ah, yes. We'll use. That's a great excuse for thousands of assets per cell.
You mean a glorious 3 frames per second setup?
You'll learn to love occlusion planes. That is probably without a doubt one of my favorite tools. Clipping some rocks into your pillars makes the pillars look less like the pillars you're using everywhere. So that's also nice. Putting multiple pillars in an area can also let you create archways, which are natural constructions. Though Skyrim itself does not have stalactites, there are some stalactite resources out there that you might be able to use if you are just messing around with dungeons. And using those properly can create very interesting results. In the end, one of the biggest takeaways for interior design is you're going to be experimenting much more than you think you are. Every new dungeon, you're going to be experimenting somewhat with new strategies, and you're going to get better because of it. Even if you're drawing out what you think your dungeons are going to look like, there's going to be experimentations, there's going to be some assessment of your work in some areas. You might not be able to realize what you were thinking. You might not be able to realize the drawing you made because assets, despite being able to be rotated in 3 different axes, 360 degrees, there are still limitations. You're never going to be able to get everything done that you want. But learning to make sacrifices to achieve about 99% of what you want, that is what interior designers have to do. It's all about the balance.
Oh my gosh, you had a beautiful speech. And now everyone clapping.
Clap, 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 clap.
Clap emoji.
Clap.
Thank you. The golf claps can be heard from, across the room.
Yeah, I've got a question actually.
Yeah.
How do you make at what point do you make the roofs? Like the ceiling?
I tend to when I make my roofs, I tend to finish most of the room first. Because once the roof is in place, it's very hard to click the ground and decorate it. So I like to at least get the base structure here done before I move to roofs.
Makes sense.
And the rocks I tend to use for roofs are not on this palette or on Skyrim altogether. It's a Skyblivion special.
The secret sauce. I see.
What?
Yeah, the secret sauce of Skyblivion. The rocks.
Rocks and trees. And ferns, oh my.
You could say it's a fern cast. Okay, this is a bad joke. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the fern apocalypse
The
is...
fern pack.
It was already taken. You were sitting here going, okay, synonyms of apocalypse. Fire away. Just like a group of eggplants in the corner, just coming up with ideas.
I kind of want an eggplant forest. Why not?
Anything's possible with the power of Skyrim mods. Except open dungeons, don't even try it.
Sounds like a lagging festival.
Yeah. It sounds like something Arthmore would take up and then look at us and go, I bit off more than I can chew. Open cities are one thing, open dungeons would be a whole other beast.
Oh dear lord, that would just cause so much issues with lag and everything. You
No,
know.
you gotta remember there's a few, you have to master land meshes in order to make multiple layers, right? Land meshes are very useful for getting these things done, but you can only have one land mesh in that area. You can't have overlapping meshes or else you're gonna end up getting errors that result in seams, and seams are not something anyone wants to mess with when it comes to a land mesh. Just ask
Sure.
Zatac about
True.
Coral.
Yeah.
So in this instance here, open dungeons would mean that they would have to lower a lot of the land mesh down and then recreate the land with more meshes as well as bring in the dungeons, which means it's going to be a clusterfuck of assets. And there is no level of optimization that would make that shit possible. Alright. Last thing I need to do is make this little part accessible. Well, I can make it accessible from here, but I'd rather not. Taking the easy way out. Ramp's not gonna work, Dirtbound. For some people, the rotation gizmo is not as nice. So for how I do it is I will go to my render window properties and we'll go to movement. You see my rotation speed's not 1.00 but 0.6. This allows me to rotate things a little bit smoother than what the rotation gizmo usually allows. So for changing these settings, you can either go to the file outside of the CK, which is what it's referencing, or you can go through your preferences through here. This is the one I tend to use because it means I can make snap changes depending on what I'm messing around with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Alright. It just takes a while for it to save and close everything. But it's a whole lot better than closing the CK, changing those settings, and then rerunning it. So, in the end, it's kind of a no-brainer to do it there. For those who are not using CK fixes on their special edition, I heavily recommend it. Normal loading of a Skyrim mod tends to take 5-10 minutes without CK fixes, takes about 1 minute with. And Skyblivion would take hours without CK fixes, and oh my god, if you do not have the Ruffler handle patch, your life as a Skyblivion dev would be over. I think every developer for a big project is a massive fan of Nukem for this very reason. Should I leave the last 6 minutes for open discussion, or do you want me to place down ferns?
Ferns.
So, starting off, I tend to mess around with clusters heavily. Clusters like this are very great, but given the size, sometimes they could be very limiting. Now, for me, I like to have some of the dirt showing in between because that's usually how ferns sprout out. Also, it makes sure that the ferns on the sides are not floating in clusters. So we can resize, rotate. If it's on a slope, we can change the angle a little bit. But ultimately, here it's relatively flat, therefore we can do this. Sorry to disappoint half the flat cavers out here. But caves aren't flat. 9 times out of 10, so you're going to be using that rotation gizmo. Now, generally, when you're using this, you will probably not have ferns in the optimal path. So the way I'm envisioning it, with this NPC in place, I'll place him here. He's going to either go this way, or around here to get to this point. So generally, you'll see more ferns here and around here, and maybe some here. But you won't see much ferns in the usual walkable locations. Because ground constantly being stomped on as people are moving around is not great ground for people to grow their crops. And the same can be said about ferns. So if you have a weed that just does not go away in your front yard, stomp on that thing every day and watch it slowly go away. One is good for a base, but if you want to modify the base with more definition, you can use cluster 5, which is the same contents as 1, just it's in a straight line. Once you've reached the limit for that, we'll start throwing individual ferns. So fern 1 can be shrunk on here, rotate it a little bit, boom. Done with that fern. Fern 2, a little bit darker, also used. Fern 5, I believe, is, yes, the one that sticks up a little bit. And I think Fern 6 is the weird brown sunflower looking like one. Go under the movement tab. You're in render window. Movement. There's camera movement, there's movement speed here, rotation speed. Rotation speed's 0.4. Camera movement's great here. I have everything moving a little bit slower to improve how everything moves. It's all preferences. So there's reference movement up top, camera movement at the bottom. Hope that helps. Who's getting hit with so many messages? Thought I was the most popular person in the stream at the moment.
You are.
You are.
Yes, you are. Don't worry about it. You are the most beloved person here. Anyone who says something different is just a liar.
And we'll also...
Well, we maybe killed them, but it's optional. We don't have to.
Yeah. I'll settle for aiming.
And we'll probably get their ass kicked if they call you not worth it.
Don't kick my ass. I call myself not worth it all the time.
No. Asher, get the spray bottle.
Spray bottle.
No self-hatred in this server, okay.
Yes, every time somebody self-hatreds themselves, we get a spray bottle.
We're all worth it in our own way.
Can I stop the recording? Or are you still phoning?
Everyone's worth it in their own way.
I can continue if you want, but for those... Oh, we still have one person after me, though.
Yes. You have to stop.
I will be done for now, but let's have this one last look. What I was messing around with. This is something you cannot do with tiles.